Bryce met Julie for the first time when he came in to live in the same neighborhood as her, with his family. He was just about to enter his second grade in a new school. This girl Julie, however, took a weird liking to the young boy the first time she saw him. Ever since that moment, Julie never stopped trying to catch Bryce's attention. However, Bryce on the other hand found it very difficult around her. She used to annoy him and follow him like a tail. Even at school, Julie made it very hard for him. Ever since the first day at his school when Julie hugged him in front of the whole class, the kids in his class teased Bryce about his little girlfriend all the time. He never missed a chance to ignore and avoid her, knowing that she was obsessed with him for some reason. But Bryce couldn't bring himself to tell Julie not to follow him around, straight to her face. On the other hand, Julie fell for Bryce the first time she saw his dazzling eyes. She always thought that he must also felt the same for her, but was just too shy to let her know. On seeing his family the first day, she offered his father to help them move in, which eventually resulted in them both holding each other's hand. For Julie, this felt like a dream. She imagined that she was about to have her first kiss. But Bryce's mother appeared and Bryce ran behind her with his face turned red. Ever after that incident, Julie wanted to help Bryce lose his shyness. Following him around and hugging him in front of the whole class was all for the same reason. In the 6th grade, however, Bryce came up with a plan to get rid of Julie for good. He asked out the most popular girl in his class, Sherry, who Julie didn't like for some reason, and it was perfect for Bryce. He held hands and acted like a real couple with Sherry when in front of Julie. His plan was coming along perfectly. Julie stopped talking and annoying him at school. But his plan soon blew up in his face when one day his best friend, Garrett, who had a liking of Sherry himself, revealed Bryce's plan to her. On finding out what Bryce was up to, and that he was using her, Sherry broke up with Bryce, slapping him on the face. After that incident, as the word got to Julie, she got back to her usual self, even sniffing his hair from behind. Bryce was obviously creeped out of his skin, hoping that things would get better in the next grade and they would have different classes. For Julie, the chapter about Sherry and Bryce dating was very much the same. She knew that Sherry was an annoying girl who never paid attention to anyone but herself. Julie thought that it was Sherry who wanted to take Bryce away from her using her lust, and hoped that Bryce would see through her and soon leave her. Her desire soon got fulfilled when she saw them breaking up with each other and Sherry slapping him in the face. Soon after that, Bryce started to talk to Julie nicely again. She sat behind him the entire year, sniffing his hair that smelled like watermelon. Bryce's grandfather also came to know about Julie through a newspaper, where she was featured because of the stand she took against the cutting of her beloved sycamore tree. She had a great liking of the sycamore tree, spending every morning at the top of it, asking. She sometimes even asked Bryce to come to join her to enjoy the view, which he avoided every time, making up an excuse. Everyone in the neighborhood was bugged because of her habit of shouting while up on the tree. People in the town, including Bryce's father, had another thing that bugged them about Julie's family: their house. It was a shabby house with vines and weeds growing all over the place, and her father spent a lot of time painting on his lawn. However, despite all of this, Bryce's grandfather was very much interested in knowing about Julie through his grandson. He showed Bryce the newspaper, with Julie featured in it once again, praising her, saying she has an iron backbone. He even asked Bryce to invite her over to their house sometime, but the young man just didn't get why his grandfather showed interest in the annoying girl of his neighborhood. For Julie, on the other hand, the sycamore tree was more than just that. It was when one day her father told her about the beauty of the landscape to her, which she didn't understand at first. But on reaching the top of the tree, the girl could see the entire town, the fields, and the sun rising over the horizon. It was the most beautiful place for her, where she would climb up every morning to feel the cold, tingly breeze on her skin. She understood what her father wanted her to know about the beauty of the landscape. The girl slowly grew to love the tree for what it showed her and made her feel. One day, however, she saw some woodcutters with their machines approaching the tree. They planned to cut it down at the request of the owner of the land and asked the girl to climb down. She cried for help from the kids and Bryce, who was passing by the scene. Despite several desperate cries of Julie, none of the kids came up to help her protest against the cutting of the tree, leaving her alone. The firemen soon came to the scene and her father was called. Julie's father eventually talked her over it, and the girl got down from the tree. The next couple of weeks after that, Julie kept silent, losing her favorite place in the town. Even Bryce felt bad for her. Seeing her like this, he thought of approaching her to offer sympathy, but later dropped the idea when he was reminded that this was all he wished for. She wasn't bothering him anymore. Sometime after the incident, Julie's father gifted her a painting of her very dear sycamore tree. She was overjoyed seeing the tree again, hugging her father. She hung the painting in her room, seeing it the first thing in the morning and the last thing before going to sleep every day. She eventually felt her perception change over things and Bryce, wondering if she felt the same way about Bryce anymore. Some weeks later, Julie started to grow fond of eggs. She watched them grow, studied them, and was fascinated after seeing the sign of life up close. She participated and won the science fest held at their school, where she demonstrated and explained the hatchings of the eggs. Bryce, however, wasn't really a fan of her liking of eggs and was mad at the fact that she even won the first prize instead of him. One day, while taking care of her chickens, she noticed that her hens were laying eggs, and that day on their household overflowed with eggs. Soon her neighbors offered to pay her for the eggs, and she decided to give away the rest of them to Bryce's family as a token of appreciation for their kind nature. Bryce's grandfather and mother much appreciated her gift and her kind nature, but Bryce and his father had a different view over it. Both of them didn't like receiving eggs from the girl. His father asked him to return the eggs. Bryce didn't want to say no to her and came up with an idea to throw her eggs whenever she delivered them to him. She was happy to share the eggs with his family, and he disposed of them with the garbage. This went on for a couple of weeks, but one day Julie saw him throwing away the eggs she gave him. She was very angry at him, ignoring and avoiding him in school, and didn't even share the same table with him. Bryce found it way worse than her annoying her, as it reminded him of him being a jerk. This soon got worse when he saw his grandfather with Julie in her yard, helping her out with it. He was envious of the girl that his grandfather was talking with her more than he did with Bryce himself, even though they lived in the same house. The same night, Chet came up to Bryce, telling him that he found out about the eggs. In their small talk, Chet asked Bryce to apologize to Julie and that it would make him feel better. The next day, Bryce did exactly that. He built up the courage to stand in front of her. He appreciated the handwork she put in the yard and apologized for throwing the eggs off. Julie accepted the apology and they both had a small conversation. Julie said that Bryce was really lucky to have a grandfather like Chet, and that he mentioned that she reminded Chet of his past wife. After that, things started to get back to normal. Bryce felt much relieved, dropping off the burden he carried for weeks. But one night when Bryce was watching the TV with his family, his father got into a heated argument with Grandpa Chet. His father was furious with Chet for spending time with a stranger, rather than his own grandson. He also mocked Julie's family, calling them clumsy and weird. To this, Chet replied furiously that the family had several problems and disclosed why they couldn't maintain their lawn or their house. He mentioned Julie's uncle had a brain abnormality due to his neck getting wrapped around with the umbilical cord when he was a baby, just like Bryce. Bryce's mother walked away hearing the argument, his father behind her. Chet revealed to Bryce that he also had his neck wrapped around, but fortunately, the doctors managed to detangle it before any further harm. Chet and Bryce went out to take a walk outside where his grandfather told him that Julie was a very special girl. He mentioned to him how they both talked for hours about the feeling she felt while she was on that tree. This thought was stuck in the mind of Bryce. He kept thinking of her all night, how she talked about the feeling of being held above the ground, and having the cold breeze touch her hair. This was not how a kid talks, and he slowly started to get fond of her. Going back to Julie's home, before she fixed her yard, she asked her parents to let her do it, revealing that Bryce called her yard a mess. Her mother was shaken and hurt severely by this and insisted her husband to do something about it, whereas Julie's father, although wanted to, but couldn't help the decision. It was because he had to take care of his brother, to which Julie's mother asked him to put his family first. They argued over and started yelling at each other before they knew it, but later both apologized to Julie for the argument at the table. The next day, Julie decided to fix the lawn by herself when Chet came in to help her with it. He mentioned that he read about her in the newspaper and that his wife would have done the same if she was there, and she would have stayed up the tree with Julie all night long, if that was what it would take to save that spectacular view. They both talked over things like the sycamore tree and her likings the whole time they fixed the yard. Her perception of her friends gradually changed. Eventually, she found herself losing interest in Bryce. On the other hand, Bryce had Julie all over his mind. He kept looking at her in the classrooms. This worsened when his mom announced at his family table that she is going to invite Julie's family over for dinner. Bryce's father and Bryce himself were against this decision, but it was no use. The lady had already made up her mind. At school, Garrett found the newspaper article featuring Julie in his folder, and Bryce had no cover-up left on him. He and Garrett later had a talk about his sudden interest in Julie. Garrett told him that he didn't actually like her. He just felt bad for throwing the eggs she gave him away and insulting her yard. Garrett kept making fun of Julie and eventually about her uncle, who was mentally challenged. Hearing his friend crossing the line, Bryce had enough of it. Giving off a fake laugh to Garrett, Bryce left him in the library and went home. Bryce then admitted that he in fact grew feelings for her, as he felt wrong when Garrett insulted her. This was never like that before. However, Julie heard everything that Bryce and Garrett spoke. When she was studying in the library, a friend of Julie came up to her, mentioning that she found out that Bryce had a huge crush on Julie and that she saw him looking at her. Julie denied it at first, but then her friend dragged her to where Garrett and Bryce were talking. Both the girls started eavesdropping on the boys. When Garrett made fun of Julie's uncle and Bryce laughed about it, Julie was devastated by this and lost all her feelings for Bryce at that very moment. On the same day, Julie, who was watering her lawn, saw her dad leave the place for his brother Daniel's birthday. Knowing this, Julie insisted on going to see her uncle too, and they both went to the apartment Daniel was staying in. At first, Daniel was scared of Julie, but they later patched things up as he came to know that she was his niece. And Julie's dad presented all the gifts he brought for him on his birthday. All three of them then went to the ice cream shop to celebrate the occasion. However, in the ice cream shop, Daniel caused a huge commotion by dropping his ice cream. He instantly came back to acting normal when Julie gave him another cone, and the three soon went back to the apartment, saying goodbye to Daniel. After the incident in the shop, Julie understood why her father couldn't take care of his brother on his own and why things got out of hand. On getting back home, Julie's mother revealed that their family was invited to dinner by Bryce's mother. Julie and her father both were not at all excited about it, knowing what the Bryce family has treated them like, insulting Julie and making fun of their problems. However, noticing how excited and lively Julie's mother was about the dinner, both of them agreed to pay a visit to the family. Julie watched the painting her dad made for her as she got ready for the party. She thought how Bryce never was her friend, and never was there for her in need. She was about to tell her mom that she didn't wish to go to his house, but seeing her mother so happy about the dinner, she couldn't bring herself to say it. On the flip side, Bryce was secretly excited and was getting ready for Julie as the bell rang and she was already at their doorstep along with her family. As the two families greeted each other, Bryce came up to Julie. He told her she was looking pretty, but she told him that she heard how he and Garrett made fun of her uncle at the library and not to speak to her ever again. Before the young man could understand what just happened, she left him and went on to join the conversation between her father and Grandpa Chet. Bryce stood there speechless and embarrassed. However, gathering up the courage to speak to her again, he apologized, saying he knows what Garrett said was wrong, but he couldn't justify himself by laughing about it and not saying anything to his friend. She took a seat with her family at the table, leaving him yet again, calling him a coward for not being able to speak up to his friend. At the table, she sat in front of him, not uttering a word to him, not even looking at him. Unknown to the cold conflict between the two kids, the families chatted on various topics. Bryce's father brought up the topic of the sycamore tree, saying that he was relieved that it was cut down. On this note, Julie's father commented about how for some people it was the jewel of the neighborhood. Bryce wanted to speak up too, but didn't, as he did not want to go against his father. The family continued to chat when Bryce's father stirred up the conversation by asking Mark and Matt, Julie's brothers, about their future plans, to which the brothers revealed that they planned to focus on their music career after high school. Onto which the man's wife also mentioned that Bryce's dad used to be a saxophone player. The twin brothers asked him if he would like to come jam with them sometime, but the man refused the offer, saying it was a thing in the past. Hearing this, Bryce was reminded of something. He noticed his father trying to fake a smile, but failing. Julie also noticed that inside his shining cover, Bryce's father had something dark and rotten inside him that he hid from everyone. The rest of the evening passed pretty quickly. However, Julie still wouldn't look at him. Before leaving, however, Julie apologized to him for talking rudely to him. But in his heart, he knew she didn't forgive him. He felt worthless and ashamed. Shortly after the dinner, the family had a small argument yet again, which rapidly escalated, and Bryce's father ended up slapping his own daughter. On his bed, Bryce wondered why his dad was acting like so. He wondered, why did his father despise Julie's family, her father's paintings, his yard, and whatnot? He was just envious of them and was mad at himself. But the young man couldn't think of the reason for that. But whatever the reason may be, it didn't matter anymore, as he was no longer a part of Julie's life. He thought to himself, whereas Julie slept peacefully that night, not having to think about Bryce anymore, and grateful to the family she had. Soon at the school came the Basket Boy auction event, where the girls would bid to have lunch with the boys presented on the stage to them. Bryce was terrified by the fact that he was supposed to go in front of the stage where the girls were going to bid for him. On the day of the presentation, he was nervous if Julie was going to bid on him. However, he heard her bid on Eddie, a nice boy in the class for who no one else was bidding for. While the prettiest girl in the school, Sherry, won the bid to have lunch with Bryce. At the lunch table, he could not think of anything else but Julie enjoying and laughing behind Sherry, having lunch with someone else. He stood up from his chair and pulled Julie out of hers, grabbing her hand. He closed his eyes, leaning in to kiss her. Julie, however, pushed him back and went out of the room filled with people, who were now laughing at Bryce for blowing up his first kiss. As he walked out to chase after Julie, Garrett caught up to him. He was furious at Bryce for leaving Sherry for someone weird like Julie. This time, however, Bryce did not stand listening against her and pushed Garrett away, saying that he wouldn't understand. He walked home with dirty dishes in his basket and went directly to Julie's place, knocking at her door. But there was no one to answer his call. After getting home, he tried calling her cell phone, but Julie's mom picked it up, telling him that Julie didn't want to talk to him. Bryce knew he wanted to talk to her, and then he came up with an idea. For Julie, however, the turn of events on the day of the auction were very different. In the morning, he decided to leave her money behind at her house so that she just couldn't bid for him out of temptation. But when riding her bike, her neighbor called out to Julie, giving her the money she was yet to pay the little girl for the eggs she delivered to her. Resisting at first, Julie decided to take the money to her school and pretend that she just didn't have it. Reaching school, she ran into Sherry, who planned to bid on Bryce. Julie, even though furious, told her to go ahead and waste her money over him, that she was over him anyways. But the closer his name came to announce, the more impatient she got. However, before Bryce came Eddie. Seeing that no one else was bidding for him, she bid for him out of sympathy. She then had her lunch with Eddie, but her mind was continuously shifting over to his side where Bryce was sitting. Suddenly, when he came up to her to kiss, she pushed him away and went straight to her home. She kept ignoring him for 2 weeks, not receiving his calls or answering his knocking on the door. However, 2 days after trying continuously to reach her, he stopped. Julie thought she got rid of him, but little did she know that he was out there digging a hole in her garden. She was about to ask him to leave when Julie's father told her that he himself gave him the permission to dig that hole. She gazed out the window watching him ruin her garden, wondering how her father could approve of this. Suddenly, the boy moved out of her view, only to come back with a big plant in his hands. He put the plant in the hole he dug and started covering it up. Soon Julie realized it was a sycamore tree that he was planting for her in her garden. She walked up to him, looking at her once again dazzling eyes, which she fell in love with the first time she saw them. He was also reminded of the first time he saw Julie run up to him as he came closer to her. They both got low to the ground as he gave Julie's hand a soft touch. She smiled at him with happiness once again as both of them planted the sycamore plant into the ground.